I had gotten the highest grade in my class, and finally my parents agreed to accompany me for my heart checkup. It was raining heavily outside, and I waited for hours hoping to reach them, but no matter how many times I called, I couldn't get through. After 3 long hours, I decided to walk through the rain to the bus stop and head to the hospital alone. As I made my way through the soaked streets, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my cousin, Lily. The message included a photo of my parents in matching aprons cooking in the kitchen. The caption read, "My aunt and uncle are the best. They came right over to cook for me when I said I couldn't make noodles. I'm so lucky to have them." A knot tightened in my chest as I looked at the photo. This was the same pair of parents who had always said they were too busy to help me with the smallest things. But now, they had made time for Lily. I had always felt like an afterthought in their eyes, but today, the sting of their indifference felt sharper. Still, I couldn't afford to let myself dwell on it too long. My heart was still a concern, and I had to focus on getting to the hospital. I quickly typed a response to Lily's post. Why call them aunt and uncle? Just call them mom and dad. It was cold, but I couldn't help myself. I put my phone back in my pocket, hoping the small act of defiance would make me feel better. As I got on the bus, the rain continued to pour outside. By the time I reached the hospital, I was already numb. Lily was my cousin. She had come to live with us after her parents passed away when she was very young. At first, I was happy to have a little sister. But over the years, it became clear that my parents treated her like their own daughter. They would always say how sorry they were for her, how she needed more attention, more love. They never told me that directly, but I could tell. I had to learn to do everything myself, study, cook, and even go to the hospital alone. They would often say things like, "Can't you just order takeout?" or "Is something so small really worth bothering us for?" They seemed so busy, too busy for me. I thought they were just overwhelmed with work, and I learned to not ask for their help. When I got the best grade in my class, they promised me one wish as a reward. I thought long and hard, then asked them if they could come with me to my heart checkup. They agreed immediately, and I was looking forward to that day. But now, because of one comment from Lily, I found myself walking alone through the rain, feeling like nothing more than an inconvenience. I pushed those thoughts aside and arrived at the hospital, exhausted and emotionally drained. But as soon as I walked into the hospital, I was greeted by a nurse who rushed me to a room to rest. Despite my exhaustion, I couldn't stop thinking about how little my parents cared about me. As I lay in the hospital bed, my phone rang. It was my mom. Before I even had a chance to say anything, she was yelling at me. "Emily, what did you mean by that comment to Lily? Don't you know how hard her life has been? She lost both her parents, and now you're upsetting her like this? She burned her hand trying to make noodles, and we came right over to help her, and you—" Her voice grew louder. "You're just pretending to be sick again. Always pretending to get our attention. We've done everything for you, and this is how you repay us?" The words stung, but I didn't have the strength to argue. To them, I was always just looking for trouble. It wasn't about me being sick. It was never about me. It was always about Lily. I didn't respond, just let the call end. But the moment my mom hung up, she texted me, "It's not like I meant it that way. You're grown now. You need to learn independence. This is the first step. And Lily needs us too. You understand, right?" I looked at the message for a moment, feeling something inside me shift. A calmness washed over me, a kind of emotional detachment. I simply replied, "I know." It wasn't that I was angry anymore. I had stopped expecting anything from them a long time ago. I understood that they weren't capable of giving me what I needed. They never had been. As I lay there in the sterile hospital room, the buzzing of my phone was constant. It was another post from Lily, but this time it was more than a simple picture. She'd written, "I don't know how they do it. My aunt and uncle always make the best food, and they really go out of their way for me. I can't believe how lucky I am." I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of her words. My parents had always been so kind to her. But with me, it was like I had to fight for their attention, always struggling to be seen. Growing up, I had watched them give her everything she wanted, while I was left to fend for myself. I couldn't help but think about the past. When I was younger, I had always tried to do things on my own, never asking for help. I cooked for myself, I studied by myself, and I learned to live without their care. They were too busy for me, too consumed by their own lives. I tried to understand. They always told me that they had no choice but to give all their love to Lily because she didn't have parents anymore. They said it wasn't fair to ignore her needs, and I should be grateful that I had a family, even if it didn't feel like it. It wasn't always this way. There were times when I thought they might love me the same way they loved Lily, but every time they would ignore me or dismiss my feelings, it chipped away at that belief. Every time they told me I was being selfish for wanting something as simple as their attention, I began to question whether I had done something wrong. I didn't know how to handle it anymore. Lily wasn't my real sister, but she might as well have been. She moved into our house when I was just a child. My parents had taken her in out of pity, and I had thought at the time that she would be a new friend, someone to share my life with. But soon enough, it became clear that my parents treated her as if she were their own daughter. I wasn't a priority anymore. They would always say how much they admired Lily for being so strong, for being able to endure the loss of her parents. Meanwhile, they would always tell me that I was just looking for attention with my heart condition. Even when I told them how I felt, how alone I was, they couldn't see past their own version of reality. They would argue with me, telling me I couldn't possibly understand what Lily had gone through, and I should stop being selfish. I had spent years trying to get them to see me, to care for me in the way I needed, but the more I tried, the more distant they became. Now, as I lay in this hospital bed, I felt numb. I was so tired of trying to make them understand. I didn't need their approval. I had finally accepted that. I glanced at the time on my phone. It was already past noon, and I still hadn't eaten. I was hungry, but I didn't feel like eating the food that was probably being delivered by my mom. I sent her a quick message. No need to bring anything. I've ordered takeout. I wanted to be left alone, to eat in peace. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again, and it was a text from my mom. She had responded to my earlier comment to Lily, and her message was filled with guilt and anger. "Why are you doing this to us, Emily? Don't you understand how much we've been through with Lily? She's been struggling too, and now you're making her feel worse. Why do you always have to make things about you?" I didn't want to reply. I didn't feel like explaining myself. So I just turned off my phone and leaned back in the bed. My thoughts wandered, and I started to feel that familiar ache in my chest, not from my heart condition, but from the realization that I had been fighting for love from the wrong people all along. Later that afternoon, after a few hours of silence, I received another text. It was from my dad, John. He wasn't upset like my mom had been, but there was something in his words that made me realize just how little he understood me. "Emily, your mom didn't mean what she said. She's just stressed. You've been through a lot, and we're proud of how strong you've become. Lily needs us, but so do you. I know we've made mistakes, but we're family, and I want us to be okay again." I didn't feel anger this time, just a deep, empty sense of resignation. My dad had always been the calmer one. He never raised his voice, but he was just as detached. I knew it wasn't intentional, but his attempts to make things right always felt hollow. He wanted us to just move on, to pretend like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It hadn't been for a long time. I didn't reply to his message. What was there to say? The truth was, I didn't want their love anymore. I didn't need their approval. It was too late for that. The rain had finally stopped, and the sun was beginning to set. I lay in my hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional beep of the heart monitor next to me. My mind wandered back to the past. I remembered the days when I used to hope they would come to my rescue, that they would see me for who I was and love me as I needed. But it never happened. As I thought about it, I realized that I had become so used to being alone that it didn't even hurt anymore. The disappointment, the neglect, it had all blended into the background of my life. I had learned to survive on my own, and now I didn't need anyone. I was lying there, just thinking, when my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Lily. This time, her message wasn't about food or pictures of my parents. It was a long text, full of apologies and self-pity. She wrote, "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never meant to hurt you. I know it must be hard for you, but I don't want you to hate me. I just need them, and I know you understand. Please don't be mad." I read it through twice. I knew Lily didn't mean any harm, but I also knew she didn't truly understand what was going on. She was just like my parents, acting out of guilt and a sense of obligation. She was trying to be the good girl, the one who never caused trouble, the one who deserved all the love and attention. I felt a pang of something deep in my chest, but it wasn't anger. It was sadness. I realized then that Lily would never understand me, not in the way I needed her to. And maybe I would never understand her either. But I had stopped caring. I didn't respond to her message. I couldn't. The nurse came in to check on me, and for a moment I allowed myself to relax. The weight of everything, of the years of feeling invisible, seemed to lift just a little. I knew the path ahead of me wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that I was finally ready to take it on my own. As I watched the nurse leave, I turned my attention back to the window. The sky had cleared and the air felt fresh, as if the world had just been washed clean. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a small sense of peace. The next morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly refreshed. The hours of rest had done me some good, though my heart still felt heavy. I stared at the ceiling for a while, trying to block out the noise in my head. My thoughts kept drifting back to my parents, to Lily, and the tangled web of emotions we had all been caught in for so long. I knew they were planning to visit me later in the day, but part of me didn't want to see them. I had grown tired of pretending like everything was fine. Every time they came to visit, it felt like they were just checking off a box, making sure they had done their parental duty without ever really seeing me. It was a shallow gesture, and I didn't need it anymore. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Sarah, my mom. "Emily, we're coming to see you soon. We'll bring you some food and make sure you're comfortable. Let us know if you need anything else." I read the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could feel the anger building again, but I refused to give in. I didn't want to engage in another argument. I was tired of fighting for their attention, tired of trying to explain myself. Instead, I typed back simply, "Thanks, I'm good. Don't worry about it." I didn't want to hurt them, but I also didn't want to keep pretending. I had been pretending for years, and now I was done. Around noon, John and Sarah arrived at the hospital. They came into the room with their usual expressions, slightly forced smiles, eyes full of that familiar guilt. As they walked in, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of resentment. They looked at me as if I was still the child who needed their protection, their care. "Hey, kiddo," John said, his voice softer than usual. "How are you feeling today?" I shrugged. "Same as yesterday." Sarah walked over to my bed and placed a small bag on the table next to me. "We brought you some food," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "You need to eat well to get better." I didn't look at the food. I didn't care about it. What I wanted, what I needed, was for them to understand, to see me for who I was, not just as someone they had to take care of, but I knew they would never get it. They sat down next to my bed, and we fell into an awkward silence. They seemed to be waiting for me to say something, but I didn't know what. Everything I had ever wanted to say to them felt pointless now. After a few minutes, John finally broke the silence. "Look, Emily, we know we've made mistakes. We didn't always know how to deal with everything, but we're here now. We're trying." Trying. It was the same thing they always said. They were always trying, but they never really succeeded. And now, after all these years, it felt too late. I wasn't the same person I had been when I was younger, the person who had longed for their approval. Now, I had learned that I couldn't keep waiting for them to change. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I felt like if I opened my mouth, I might say something I would regret. It wasn't their fault, I knew that, but it wasn't mine either. We were all just stuck in this endless loop of miscommunication and unmet expectations. John looked over at Sarah, as if silently asking for help. She sighed and put a hand on my arm. "Emily, we just want you to know that we love you, both of you. We want to make things right." "Yeah, well, I'm not sure that's possible," I said quietly, finally meeting her eyes. The words hung in the air between us, and for a long moment, no one spoke. I felt like I was suffocating in the silence. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The weight of the past few days was pressing down on me, and I wanted to escape, but I didn't want to fight anymore. I didn't want to keep doing this. So I stood up, slowly, careful not to disturb the IV in my arm, and walked towards the window. The world outside seemed so far away, like another life entirely. It was a life where I didn't have to constantly fight for something that wasn't coming. "Look, I think I just need some space," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to rest for a while. Thanks for coming, but I just need to be alone right now." They both stood up, looking at each other, unsure of what to do. Finally, John spoke. "Okay, kid, we'll leave you to it. We'll check in later." Sarah hesitated, then reached out to give me a quick hug. It felt stiff, forced, like a reflex rather than something genuine. But I didn't pull away. I let her hug me, if only to end the awkwardness. They left the room and I closed the door behind them. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, trying to clear my head. The hospital room felt both like a sanctuary and a prison. I was alone, but I was also trapped by my own feelings. The next few days passed slowly. I spent my time in the hospital room going through the motions, but never really feeling present. I wasn't looking for sympathy anymore, nor was I waiting for someone to come and save me. I had already accepted the reality. My parents couldn't give me what I needed, and Lily was too caught up in her own world to understand mine. I was truly alone, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. During this time, I started to focus on myself. I would read, listen to music, and try to keep my mind occupied. But it wasn't easy. There was always a part of me that felt hollow, a part of me that had been waiting for something that would never come. One morning, the doctor came in to check on me. He was a kind man, though I could tell he was becoming increasingly frustrated with my lack of progress. "Emily," he said gently, "I think it's time to talk to your parents about considering treatment options abroad. The care here isn't what you need, and we have other options in countries with more advanced medical technologies. I think it's important you talk to them about this." I looked at him, not knowing what to say. My parents didn't care about my health the way he thought they did. They were too wrapped up in their own issues to focus on anything that didn't directly concern them. But I nodded, not wanting to argue. I had grown accustomed to just going along with whatever was expected of me. That evening, my mom and dad came by again. They were still acting as if everything was fine, like they hadn't just spent days fighting with me over something that didn't even matter. I could tell they were both exhausted, but their exhaustion was different from mine. It wasn't the weariness of someone who had been through years of emotional neglect. It was the tiredness of people who had been pretending everything was okay for too long. "Hey, Emily," John said, trying to sound upbeat. "The doctor said you're doing better, right?" I nodded. "I'm fine." Sarah sat beside me, and after a moment of silence, she reached for my hand. "We've been talking about what the doctor said," she said softly, "and we think maybe it's time we start looking into better treatment options. We want you to get the best care, Emily. We've been so focused on everything else, and we're sorry." I didn't say anything. I didn't feel like responding to their words. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the gesture. It was just that it was too little, too late. They hadn't even cared enough to ask about my condition when I was younger. Now, suddenly, they were willing to make big decisions about my health. It felt wrong. I wasn't the same person I was back then. I wasn't the person who needed their approval anymore. "We'll start looking into options abroad," Sarah continued. "Maybe that will help. We can figure this out together, okay?" I didn't want to argue. It didn't matter. I had already made up my mind. I didn't need their help anymore. I wasn't going to keep living in a house full of people who didn't understand me. People who couldn't love me in the way I needed. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed, I realized something that had been building up for a while. I wasn't the helpless child I used to be. I had grown up, and it was time for me to take control of my life. I had already been planning my escape for months, and now, more than ever, I was ready to leave. The idea of studying abroad had always been a dream of mine, but it wasn't just about the education. It was about starting over, being free from the expectations and obligations of my family. I didn't need them to save me. I had learned to save myself. I made up my mind that I would go abroad. I would take the necessary steps to leave, and I wouldn't look back. My parents had their own life with Lily, and that was fine. It was time for me to live my own. A few days later, after the doctor's recommendation, I started preparing for my departure. I didn't share my plans with my parents. I didn't need their approval anymore. It was a quiet rebellion, one I wasn't sure they would understand. But I didn't care. I had spent too many years waiting for them to see me, to love me the way I needed. I had to move forward, alone. John and Sarah came to visit again, though they didn't seem to know what to say. They were trying, but it wasn't enough. It never had been. I could see it in their eyes, this desperate hope that I would somehow forgive them, that I would embrace them again like I had when I was younger. But I couldn't. The years of emotional neglect had left scars, scars that could never be erased by a few kind words. "Emily, we've been talking," Sarah said, her voice tentative. "We know you don't think we've done enough for you, and we're sorry for that, but we want you to know that we love you. We want to make things right." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel the anger I used to feel. I didn't feel the longing. I simply felt nothing. I had given up on them a long time ago. Their love, or at least their idea of love, wasn't what I had needed. It was too late to fix that now. "I know you love me," I said quietly, staring at the wall. "But it's not the same, and I don't need it anymore. I've learned to take care of myself." Sarah's face fell, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Emily, you don't mean that. We're your parents. We'll always be here for you." But I shook my head. "No, you won't. You never were. Not in the way I needed." John opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "I've made up my mind," I said firmly. "I'm going to study abroad. I'll be okay on my own. I've already arranged everything." The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel the tension, the confusion in their eyes, but I didn't want to explain myself anymore. I didn't want to fight. I had nothing left to say. After a long pause, John finally sighed. "If that's what you want, I guess we can't stop you." Sarah just nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't understand, Emily. Why do you want to leave us?" "Because I need to find myself," I answered, my voice steady but soft. "I've spent too many years pretending, trying to be something I'm not. I don't need you to fix me anymore. I'm fixing myself." The weight of my words hung in the air, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I was betraying them. I was finally doing something for myself, something that I had wanted for so long, and it felt right. They stayed for a while longer, but the conversation never moved forward. It was clear that they didn't understand, and maybe they never would. But that was okay. I wasn't waiting for them to understand anymore. Later that evening, after they left, I sat on the bed, looking out of the window at the night sky. The stars were faint, hidden by the city's lights, but they were still there. I could almost feel their quiet presence, a reminder that no matter how hard things had been, I was still here. I was still breathing, still moving forward. I had made the decision to leave, and nothing could change that now. I wasn't going to waste any more time hoping for things to be different. The past was behind me, and the future was waiting. In the days that followed, I started making preparations. I didn't tell anyone else about my plans. Only a few close friends knew. I didn't need anyone to convince me that this was the right thing to do. I had already made up my mind. The days leading up to my departure felt surreal. I spent my time packing, making final arrangements, and mentally preparing myself for the next chapter of my life. It was strange to think about leaving everything behind, my parents, my home, everything I had known, but I had long since accepted that this was what I needed. I didn't want to hold on to the past anymore. There was no point in trying to fix relationships that had been broken for so long. I had given everything I could, and now it was time to move on. The morning of my departure, I woke up early. The hospital room felt smaller now, more confining than it ever had before. I was ready to leave, but there was a part of me that felt sad. Not because I was leaving, but because I had never truly felt at home in this place, with these people. The realization was heavy, but it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like liberation. When Sarah and John came to visit that morning, they didn't say much. They were trying, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They knew they couldn't stop me. They didn't even try to convince me to stay. It was almost as if they had accepted that I was finally leaving, and there was nothing more they could do. "Emily," Sarah said quietly as she stood at the door, her eyes filled with sorrow, "we want you to be happy. We really do, but I don't understand why you have to go so far away." "I need to do this, Mom," I said, my voice steady but calm. "I need to find my own way. I can't keep living in this world where everything is always about someone else. I need to find myself." John nodded, though he looked tired. "We'll always be here for you, Emily. No matter where you go, we'll be here." But I didn't respond. I just nodded, trying to keep the lump in my throat from growing. I had already said everything that needed to be said. There was nothing left to discuss. They stayed with me for a few more minutes, their presence a reminder of all the things we had been through, all the things I was leaving behind. Then, after one last long look at me, they left. I knew they were trying to hold on, but I also knew they understood. I had to go. I had to do this on my own. After they left, I packed the last of my things and called a cab. The ride to the airport was quiet, just me and my thoughts, with the familiar city streets passing by outside. It was a strange feeling, leaving everything behind. The city, my home, my family. It all seemed like a dream I was walking away from. As I stood at the airport waiting to board my flight, I looked around at the busy travelers, the families saying their goodbyes, the people in a rush to catch their flights. It was a world so different from the one I had just left behind. For the first time, I felt like I was part of something bigger, something beyond the small life I had lived. I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. The flight was long, and I spent most of it staring out of the window, watching the clouds pass by below. When we landed, I stepped out of the airport and into a new life, a life that was mine to shape, mine to control. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. The world was vast, and it was waiting for me to explore. I wasn't running away from anything anymore. I was running towards something new, something better. And as I walked away from the airport, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The first few weeks in my new country were a whirlwind. Everything was different. The people, the culture, the language. It was exactly what I needed, a fresh start, away from the expectations and judgments of my family. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this opportunity. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The school was everything I had hoped for. The teachers were supportive, the students kind, and for once, I wasn't constantly trying to prove my worth to anyone. It was a place where I could be myself, without the constant pressure to be someone I wasn't. I had finally found a place where I belonged. But despite the excitement of the new beginning, there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself that I didn't need anyone. But deep down, I knew that part of me still longed for something. A connection, a sense of belonging. It wasn't about my parents. I had already accepted that they would never be the people I needed them to be. It was about something else, something deeper. I was still searching for the love I had never received, the love I had spent years hoping for. One day, after class, I went for a walk in the park. The weather was perfect, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the ground. It was peaceful, and for a moment I allowed myself to just be. As I walked, I checked my phone. There was a new message from Sarah, my mom. She had been sending me texts every few days, asking how I was doing, but I hadn't responded in weeks. I wasn't sure how to reply. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also didn't want to keep pretending everything was fine. Her message read, "Emily, I hope you're doing okay. I miss you. I know things haven't been easy, but I want you to know that I love you. Please call me when you have a moment. I need to hear your voice." I stared at the message for a long time. I hadn't realized how much I had been avoiding them, how much I had been running from everything. The thought of calling them, of hearing their voices again, stirred something inside me. But I quickly pushed it aside. I didn't need to go back. I had made my choice. I put my phone back in my pocket and kept walking. The cool evening air felt refreshing, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of everything, the expectations, the disappointments, the constant need for validation seemed to lift just a little. In the days that followed, I continued to focus on my studies. I met new people, made new friends, and slowly started to build a life for myself here. I found a small apartment close to campus, a place that was all mine. I furnished it with the bare essentials, and when I looked around at my new space, I felt a sense of pride. I wasn't alone anymore, not in the way I had been before. I had people around me who cared, people who valued me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be, and that made all the difference. But there was still a lingering emptiness, a space in my heart that I wasn't sure how to fill. I had come to terms with the fact that I would never have the relationship with my parents that I had once dreamed of. They would never be the parents I had wanted them to be. And Lily, she was part of their world now, and there was no place for me there. It was hard to let go of that hope, but I knew it was time. The future was waiting for me, and I was ready to move forward. Months passed, and my new life took shape. I was settling in, finding my rhythm, but there were moments when I couldn't quite shake the feeling of being torn between two worlds. My parents, my old life, still lingered in the back of my mind, like shadows I couldn't quite escape. But the longer I stayed in this new place, the less power those shadows seemed to have over me. I was beginning to believe that I was better off without the constant weight of their expectations. I had been receiving messages from Sarah, my mom, every few weeks. The texts were always short, asking if I was okay, if I had everything I needed. Each message seemed like an attempt to reach out, but they always felt like they were coming from a place of guilt rather than genuine care. I never replied. It wasn't that I hated her. It was more that I had stopped expecting anything from her. I had given so much of myself to them over the years, and now, I realized, it was time to focus on my own needs. One day, while walking through the city, I received a call. I recognized the number immediately. It was Sarah. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep my distance. But the other part of me, the part that still longed for some kind of connection, couldn't bring myself to hang up. "Hello?" I said, my voice soft, unsure of how to begin. "Emily," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly, "I've been thinking a lot about you lately, about how we left things. I know I wasn't always there for you, and I'm so sorry for that. I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to try. I miss you. Please, can we talk?" I didn't know how to respond. The words she was saying, the apology, it sounded sincere, but it also sounded like something she had been rehearsing. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to give her the chance to prove that things could be different, but I had been disappointed by her so many times before. Could I really trust her now? "Mom," I said slowly, "I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off. It's not that I don't want to talk to you, but I've had to let go of so much just to survive. I've had to learn to take care of myself, and I can't go back to the way things were." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, steady and deep, as if she was trying to collect her thoughts. "I understand," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I just want you to know that I love you. I don't know what I can do to make up for everything, but I'm here, Emily. Always." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words, but I didn't know if it was enough. The truth was, I had already moved on. I had created a new life for myself, one where I didn't need her love to survive. But that didn't make the conversation any less painful. "I'm glad you called," I said quietly, "but I don't think we're ready for what you want. I can't go back, Mom. I've moved forward." "I know," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know that I'll always be here if you ever need me." "I'll be okay," I said softly. "I promise." The call ended, and I stood there for a moment, just breathing. It wasn't a moment of closure, but it was something. A small step, maybe, in the right direction. I didn't know what the future held, but I was beginning to realize that I didn't need them in the way I thought I did. I was enough, just as I was. Later that evening, as I walked through the streets of the city, I felt a strange sense of peace. The busy streets were filled with people going about their lives, but I didn't feel lost in the crowd anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I didn't need my parents to define who I was. I didn't need them to love me in a way that they couldn't. I had found my own place in the world, and that was enough. The months turned into a year, and my life abroad became more than just a new beginning. It became everything I had ever hoped for. The weight of my past no longer clung to me. I had learned to live without the constant pull of unmet expectations. I was finally free to be myself, to embrace the person I had always wanted to be. I made new friends, found a community that welcomed me without hesitation. I focused on my studies, my passions, and my growth. The freedom to define my own identity, to build a life on my own terms, was something I cherished every single day. But there was still a small part of me that wondered if things could ever be different with my parents. Could I truly leave behind the fragments of the family I had once hoped for? The answer, I realized, was simple. I had to let go. Let go of the dream of a perfect family, of the love that was never there in the way I needed it to be. I had spent so much time wishing for things that could never happen. It was time to stop waiting for a love that wasn't coming and to learn to love myself instead. One evening, as I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker like tiny stars below, I received a message from Sarah. It was a picture of a letter she had written to me. The message said, "I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me. No matter what happens, you'll always be my daughter. I love you." I didn't respond right away. I looked at the letter for a long time, taking in her words. It wasn't the apology I had waited for all those years, but it was something. It was enough. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel bitterness or resentment. I just felt a deep, quiet peace. I knew that I would never be able to fix everything with my parents, and that was okay. I had made my peace with it. The love I had always wanted from them wasn't the kind of love I needed now. I had learned to take care of myself, to fill the voids that had once seemed so insurmountable. And in doing so, I had discovered a deeper, more fulfilling love, the love for myself. The future was still uncertain, but I no longer feared it. I was no longer that girl who felt invisible, alone, and unworthy. I was someone different now, someone strong, someone capable, someone who had learned the true meaning of independence. As I took a deep breath and let the weight of everything settle, I realized that the journey I had taken wasn't about leaving behind my past. It was about learning to live with it, accepting it, and moving forward. And with that, I closed my eyes, knowing that my story was just beginning. A new chapter was waiting for me, and I was ready to write it.